I'd like to begin this morning with a question for us to think about, and that is, how do you obtain righteousness? If you try to be very, very good for many years, can you obtain righteousness? If you do many religious things like praying, reading the Bible, maybe doing deeds of charity, then can you obtain righteousness? Many people believe if they could just figure out exactly what God would like and what would please God, that if they did that, then they would be righteous. They would be in right standing with God. And some get discouraged because they think that they can never behave as God would want them to. How can I ever be good enough to be considered righteous before God? And so they just give up on it and believe that that would never happen. They could never have that. It's too much effort, it's too difficult, it's too tall an order, and so we think. But we need to see and understand that it is not outward acts, it is not outward religious observances that put us in right relationship with God. It's not that will make us righteous. And we know that the Jewish people were struggling for centuries to follow laws, to somehow be in right relationship with God by following all of these rules. But those would never completely succeed because we will always sin and do wrong. So righteousness is not something really that we can ever obtain by our own efforts. For God is a holy God. And there is no human being that can come into God's presence just on their own merit. As Paul says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And all, the last time I looked, meant all. Everyone. The prophet Isaiah says it simply this way in Isaiah 53, verse 6. All we, there's that word all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. So again, everyone, all have turned away. Just think of that shepherd there with not one single solitary sheep left in the flock. They've all gone their own way. And Isaiah describes that as being all of us. So if we've all sinned and we've all fallen short of God's glory, then where is the answer? In Romans chapter 5, Paul says, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So now we know that truly the root of sin is through the fall of Adam and Eve. It's almost an inherited, well, it is an inherited tendency. We think of Adam and Eve as they're in the Garden of Eden, where they were in a perfect and sinless state. We have that in Genesis chapter 1. And it describes that they walked with God in the cool of the evening. They could have such close fellowship with God because they were in perfect right standing with God. They had nothing on their conscience. They were perfectly whole, and they were filled, really, with the life of God. Their spirits were alive in God. But then Satan came in the guise of a serpent, and he tempted them. He tempted Eve, and it passed to Adam. Now Satan truly is the author of sin, for he is the original rebel against God. He had been separated from God's life when he rebelled and fell from heaven. And Jesus describes, must have kind of almost been an amazing thing for them to hear, because it shows us the eternity of Jesus. He said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So he describes that fall. And that was really the root of the fall of Adam and Eve, and the root of sin. For they unfortunately listened to the enemy's lies, and they ate of the forbidden fruit. And God had said, the The moment you eat of it, you will surely die. Now, God wasn't talking about a physical death. He was talking about a spiritual death. Your life will be separated from the life of God, and death will enter into your spirit. And that is exactly what happened when they ate of that fruit. God's life went out of their spirits, and a sin consciousness and spirit of rebellion and death entered in. And as God walked through the garden that day, that evening, and called out to them, what did they do? They hid from God. They could no longer come into God's presence. They could not abide in the holy presence of the Lord. Now we know that they went on to live physically long lives. You know, they were perfect physical specimens when God created them and filled with the life of God. And we know that they lived physically, but they did eventually die. And so a physical death followed that spiritual death. For now they had a new nature in them. They had the nature of the enemy in them, the nature of sin, of the father of lies, and that nature of death. It was lodged in their spirit. So how could humanity now ever again be put into right relationship with God? You can see that there is no way with that nature, their very spirit being different now, that they could do this on their own. For it is a law that every seed produces after its own kind. If we've got an apple tree, we're not going to expect oranges to come out of that tree. It's going to produce apples. An oak tree is going to produce acorns and other oaks coming out of those acorns. And now every one in the line of Adam would be born with that sin lodged in them, in their spirit. No one born of Adam could be born righteous and in right standing with God. They were going to take after their father, Adam. But God was not caught off guard by this problem. In fact, God already knew what would happen, and God had prepared a way for Adam's line to be made right, to have a new nature born into humankind. God would have to have a man, it would have to be a man who would walk in this earth as a man, so he would have to be born of a woman, but he would have to have a different father. He'd have to have God as his father, so that he would be born of a woman, but he would walk in this earth sinless and be able to resist the temptation of Satan. And so it could not be of Adam's line and Adam's seed, I should say. Well, God had made that plan, and there was really only one who could fill that need. God couldn't send an angel. He had millions of those, but they weren't going to fit the need of being a human being. God needed his son to come and be born in the earth as a human. And so we know that Jesus was God's answer to this problem of how can we be made righteous. Isaiah said, all we like sheep have gone astray. But in that same verse, he goes on to say, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. There's that word all again. The iniquity, the sin of us all would be laid on this one man, the suffering servant. By the Holy Spirit, Isaiah looked down through the corridors of time and he saw Messiah. He saw him suffering and bleeding on a cross. He described it in detail, that he would be put to death with the transgressors,